Good morning. Welcome. Wherever you come from, wherever you are today, whomever you love, whatever spiritual tradition you come from, however you identify, please know that you are welcome here, and we're so happy to have you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Reverend Kathy Merchant. While Reverend Beth is away, I'm leading services for the next few weeks. As you might remember from last week, we're doing an interfaith series right now. Today, we're going to have a speaker from the Jewish tradition, my friend Yehuda Mansell, and he'll be sharing later about his work with folks who struggle with addiction to opioids. So it should be a very powerful service. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the First Nations peoples. So here where we are in Vancouver, those peoples are the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I know those of you online might be on the land of other nations, so please feel free to put those nation names in the chat. Always, but especially during these difficult days, let's remember our connection to our sisters and brothers in these nations and pray for the day in which we might be with them in right relationship. Thank you. Please be seated. Many thanks to Bruce McKenzie and Sabriel for the music this morning. Thank you. Wonderful, thank you. So unfortunately, I have some sad news to report. I think some of you might already know that dear Tama, her father passed away last week. So she attended his funeral yesterday and is still in Ontario with her family. So I believe she'll be back with us next week. But if we could please hold Tama and her whole family in our hearts right now, she would most appreciate it. Thank you. And then for the lighting of the Christ candle, if any young people would like to come up, or older people, it's up to you. We don't discriminate here, so it's really your call. But if you'd like to come up and join me around the candle. I do see some young people. I see Stephen Tanner, so he can come with us. We're very grateful. Here, if you could come have a seat. Wonderful. Thank you so much. You want to come a little? I'll step back Don't want to stress you out. Yes, they've learned social distancing very well. Totally. Thank you. No, so I know you're still learning about trees. There's so much to learn. I was reading about root systems this week, and I don't know who else knows this. I thought this was so interesting, that there are 5 different kinds of roots that trees have. Did you know that? I definitely didn't know that. So you have a tap root, which is the first big root that goes straight down under a tree when it's starting, and so that one can go the deepest to help it get water right away. But then kind of next to those, if we're working our way out, you have something called heart roots that come in kind of diagonally, and they can also get water, but they can help to provide a stable foundation for the tree. And then along the surface, just underneath, or sometimes above the surface, depending on the tree and how much dirt there is, you'll have lateral roots that support it going out in a horizontal manner. And then from those, you have other roots that come down called sinker roots that help get nutrients to the lateral roots and also provide more foundation. And finally, there are fine roots that come from all of these. So that's like the network. If you've ever seen a tree that's fallen over and you see this network of all these little tiny roots connecting to these big roots, those are the fine roots that get the water and all the nutrients to these different root systems. And I thought this was so neat because if you'll see the picture with the tree on the top, and then underneath the root system fans out in the bottom and can often be even bigger than the top of the tree itself. It goes down so deep. And I think that's a lot like us, that we might have our family is like our first initial relationship. It's like the tap root that connects down. But we don't only need our family. We also need our friends, the heart root, that help provide us more of a foundation. And then past that, with the lateral roots, we need our community that can help support us so we feel stable in the ground and we can last through storms and get through things if we have our community with us. And then there are all the programs and all the people and services that support those roots, that support the community to keep us so we can all remain upright. And then all the individual actions and our interactions with everyone that go into feeding this. So that then when we have a big storm, big rain or wind or whatever, we know that we'll be more stable, and how that goes down below us and also connects us to all the other trees. And I think that's just so beautiful. This idea that each of us at the service, you might look like one person, but it's actually no one stands on their own. We all stand because we have this connection to all these other people and all these things that have gone into helping us get through the tough times in life and bring us meaning and joy and nutrients. So, and I think that might tie in a bit to what Yehuda will be speaking about later, about the importance of community and support. So I hope that's helpful to what you're learning later. Thank you. Would anyone like to come up and help me with the candle? Anybody? Don't all jump at once. Okay, Ben? I guess Stephen, I guess nobody else. Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for lighting our Christ candle and remembering that this same kind of system is what Christ taught us, how we can support each other, that he wouldn't just go and be by himself and preach, but he'd have these dinners, he'd have these get-togethers, he'd visit people who were sick. He would build that community and support that community, because all of it collectively is really what we need in this world. So thank you. Go out and do your own important work in the community and feel supported in all that you do. Thank you. If you're ready, you can continue on. Thank you.
Please stand with me. Come touch our hearts that we may know compassion from failing embers, build up blazing fire, love strong enough to overturn injustice, to seek a world more gracious. Come touch and bless our hearts. Come touch our souls that we may know and love you. Your quiet presence all shall bloom and mountains shall sing to the desire of all living things. Come all you creatures high and low, let your praises endlessly
Please be seated. I have a few announcements. While I'm offering announcements, some people will be passing around the baskets for donations, so thank you so much for doing that. First, those who have birthdays in September, if you would like to join our illustrious birthday club, you would be most welcome. So many of us donate in the month of our birthday, the age that we are, or want people to think that we are. And donate that amount towards the church. And as someone just wrote to me this week, it's a wonderful scheme for us to fight inflation, because hopefully over time we'll get more, which will combat inflation. So yes, thank you. So that's our birthday club, if you would like to join, if you have a birthday coming up. Also later today in the fireside room, we're going to be having the Soul of Aging sampler session. That'll be with Diane McCormick and Wilda Bostwick. And it should be a beautiful event today, just for about an hour and a half, from noon to 1:30. And I have heard they have snacks, including chocolate. So don't worry, you'll miss out on snacks if you go to that. So that'll just be in the fireside room afterwards. Thank you. And then we have this coming Saturday, we have a book club, or a book sale coming up. We've received so many donations of books, which is so wonderful. Thank you to those who donated. And the book sale will be from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the parking lot over at the Center for Peace parking lot, so just sort of across the alleyway. And I believe paperbacks will be about $1. Hardcover books will be $3. I think you can get 2 for $5. And if you want more, if you want to remember the information about it, you can get a sheet like this later today that has some of the details. That'll be this coming Saturday. Thank you. And then finally, our next service next week is actually going to be with this beautiful Sikh speaker, Gurwinder Singh. He's someone I met a few months ago. He's this wonderful man, so open, so generous, and he'll be joining us with his daughters next week and sharing a meditation, chanting, music, a presentation. And also he said he'd really like to do a dialogue with folks in the church, because he knows that lots of us may not have had a lot of experience with those in the Sikh tradition. So please send some questions in. If you have any questions for him about the Sikh tradition, the beliefs, the practices, the community, he would love to answer them during that next week. So you're welcome to ask the questions during that service next week, or if you'd like, you can just email me this week with any questions you have, and we can collect them to make sure that he covers everything during the presentation next week. So my email is programs@canadianmemorial.org if you have any questions for him at all. Thank you. And finally, please remember you can donate to us through our website or through our PAR program. So many of you already donate so much, and we're so grateful for what you do to help make this a loving, vibrant, thriving community. So thank you. Thank you to all that we put into this. May our gifts just expand over time to support more and more of those in the community, so all can feel welcome, all can be included, and all can know how important they are as a part of this whole. Amen.
Good morning. Today's reading is rich with meaning. It is found toward the end of Matthew's Gospel and is, in fact, the final parable of Matthew. It clearly contains judgment, but if you listen closely, you'll hear also a tremendous invitation to be part of Christ's work of peace and justice. A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. When he finally arrives, blazing in beauty and all his angels with him, the Son of Man will take his place on his glorious throne. Then all the nations will be arranged before him, and he will sort the people out, much as a shepherd sorts out sheep and goats, putting sheep to his right and goats to his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Enter, you who are blessed by my Father. Take what is coming to you in this kingdom. It's been ready for you since the world's foundation, and here's why. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was homeless, and you gave me a room. I was shivering, and you gave me clothes. I was sick, and you stopped to visit. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then those sheep are going to say, "Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you?" Then the king will say, "I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me." This is the witness of God's people. Thanks be to God.
Yes, and so my friend Yehuda Mansell is with us today. So he is someone who's in the PhD program at VST right now in conjunction with Durham University. He has an MA from Regent in theology and a BA from Ben Gurion University in Bible and archaeology. And he actually works more with refugees. He and his family live in a refugee resettlement home in Whalley, Surrey. So I know he said before, why do I always get asked to speak about this instead of refugees, when refugees is really what I'm working on? But we might be able to have him back another time. So, but in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today, Yehuda. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Reverend Kathy. Where do you want me to stand?
Do you want to stand here? And do you want a...
Yeah, I'll grab that one. Yeah.
Okay, you're in good shape. Thank you.
Is this good for feedback on the monitor? Is this okay here? Okay. Thank you for having me. I feel honored to come and hang out with you, and I've been reading about your congregation. I spoke with Reverend Beth, and she really loves you guys. It's like, aw. And so that was really neat, and I appreciate Kathy and her heart. And so I just, as a sense, I do straddle the term interfaith in the most ridiculous ways possible. So you might be a little confused, like, what? He's quoting Jesus? Yes. I love Jesus. He's amazing. So, my talk this morning is a theology of fentanyl, and I should get my clicker. I'm so silly. Watch the boom here. The warmth of a mother's hug. And I originally prepared a lot of the technical aspects of this, and you can read it later if you want. You can just bug me for the paper and the citations. But I prepared it with my auntie, who's a pharmacologist, a nurse practitioner, and a frontline worker with homelessness and addiction. So I have receipts if you want them. I would like to acknowledge that, as we did earlier, that we are on the shared and unceded territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This is very, very important when we talk about the opioid crisis, because of systemic abuse, long-term systemic abuse, lies at the foundation of the crisis that we're in. And I think we need to be aware of that. And that's one of the great darknesses that we see. So I want to raise a question and hopefully begin to answer it in little pieces. This is one aspect or one facet of the crisis we're looking at. It's not the ultimate solution, but it's part of it. So can fentanyl, and I'll explain what fentanyl is a little bit later, can fentanyl's particular appeal to users and subsequent harm clarify specific individual and societal needs and therefore appropriate pastoral and community responses? In other words, what does the opioid crisis tell us about the world we're living in, and how should we respond to that? And I think the crisis itself tells us a lot. So this crisis is a flashpoint of insight into many critical issues that we're facing right now, especially in the West and especially here in Vancouver. Addiction, homelessness, trauma, safe drug supply, and this horrific human alienation. To address these things well, we first need to humanize the crisis, apply the best research possible, and coupled with the imperative to love our neighbors and care for the least of these, an ideal that is shared quite widely across faith traditions. So I want to bring us to a rock star friend of mine. Surviving the deprivations of war and imprisonment, Francesco de Bernardone was suffering what we could conceivably diagnose as PTSD. He had come back from war. He was a mess. He was in the throes of depression and aphasia. And while riding on the outskirts of his town, he had a chance encounter with a leper. At first, he was gripped by revulsion. This is 13th century Assisi. Lepers were not kosher. And then a stronger compulsion impacted him or took him over, and he was compelled to dismount from his horse and embrace that man. And while he was embracing him, there was a mystical energy that flowed from Francis to the leper and back into Francis again. Francesco gets back on his horse. He turns back to take note of the man one last time, and he's gone, which places the story in the mystical and the transcendent. And I don't seek to dislodge it from there, but I think if we read this story through a lens of science, we can see that Francesco encountered a shot or a surge of dopamine. Dopamine is really a wonderful thing, and we need it. So at a chemical hormonal level, dopamine is one of the happiness hormones, or a neuropeptide that is activated by touch, and it's intrinsic to good feelings, the ones we associate with love and affection, orgasms, even childbirth, I am told, and believe it or not, the nurturing of children. When one of our three neuropeptides or our hormones are out of balance, be it oxytocin, dopamine, or serotonin, when those are out of balance, we experience feelings of depression and poor mental health. So let's talk about our crisis. What are we in here? Oh yeah. In April 2016, the province of British Columbia declared a health emergency surrounding the opioid crisis. Now, I don't know if you've been reading the news, but this last week we passed a grim milestone with over 10,000 deaths in our province from the opioid crisis in that time. That is catastrophic. And for the first half of this year alone, we have lost, up until I think June, we lost 1,065 individuals in BC to overdose. This year is going to probably outstrip all previous years. And I've left some stats there so you can see how the crisis has been growing. it is getting worse. And people are understandably frustrated. And we're starting to see some darker sides of our society that I haven't seen quite to this degree. And people who are going to solve this problem with forcible displacement. I don't know if you saw some of the footage from that. Or we saw a couple weeks ago a threat of murder was posted widely through the downtown east side, frightening very many people, and it has been taken quite seriously. And then a few weeks ago in Langley, there was a series of shootings. These are not solutions. These are horrific. For reasons of economic viability, potency, and street-level demand, fentanyl use is expected to grow. It's not about to go away. And when it grows, we anticipate that overdoses will continue to grow. Thankfully, there's been the mass distribution of naloxone kits. Have you seen those? They're little black kits. They have a little cross on them. Those are amazing. They're great, and they're effective. I think the best estimates we've had are about 50,000 reversals of overdose. These have been used to counteract that. That's quite significant. Without those, I can't even imagine what would have happened. But we're now starting to encounter many individuals who are resistant or they're so built up in their system that it takes 3 and 4 and sometimes as many as 6 doses of naloxone just to get them breathing again. And that's quite frightening. And we do have many people who simply cannot be saved anymore. And one of the tragic things about that I don't hear people talking about quite enough is that even though an overdose can be reversed, there can be permanent damage in the brain when there's a lack of oxygen. And so we have a whole host of people that are now permanently disabled from these overdoses. So, is this a new thing? No. Opioids have been with us for a long time. Part of the human story. One of my major research areas is the ancient Near East, and so opium's a thing. The opium poppy has been nurtured and gathered by humans since at least the Neolithic period. The oldest surviving prescription that has been found to date, written in Sumerian, actually has opium listed as a treatment for pain. Amazing. In Sumerian, the logogram, or the word picture for opium, is hulgil, happiness plant. So you kind of see that coming, right? It was used widely in Babylonian, and Egyptian, and possibly Greek civilizations, and the ability to condense or, what's the term? Increase the potency of opium has been developing all along. In the mid-19th century, or maybe it was mid-19th century, the development of morphine, nicknamed after the god Morpheus, the god of sleep and dreams, was a greater enhanced form of opium, a purer form of opium. And heroin later was developed in the late 19th century as an alternative, and a stronger alternative, safer alternative to morphine. In the 20th and 21st century, there was an explosion of different forms of synthetic opiums, and particularly we had in the 1960s the emergence of fentanyl. Okay, and heck, if you've had surgery, you've probably taken one of these at some point in time. They're very effective. As you may know, fentanyl is about 100 times stronger than morphine. That's intense. If you've been on morphine, think about that. And heroin, it's about 40 times stronger. Probably less of us have used heroin, but that's quite a kick. It is so condensed and so powerful, it's measured in micrograms rather than milligrams. So when you think about makeshift garage labs where people are mixing up very, very finite materials, you can see how improper binding with fillers, you can see how at a molecular level, this is why we have so many overdoses. Bad quality, bad quality chemists. And this is why we call it the toxic drug supply. Fentanyl is very attractive for its euphoria. All drugs of addiction release dopamine. It's a reward system in our brain. And it tells us, hey, this was a good meal. You should feel good. Or sex, it was good. You should feel good. These are positive things. And these are natural highs that we have, but when we take things like fentanyl, what we encounter is a high that can be as many as 200 times higher than what we would naturally feel. The worst part about that is once you have been taking fentanyl, your body's ability to produce dopamine decreases, and so you will never naturally feel as well as you did before. And that's really quite tragic. We inject fentanyl into the bloodstream, and it, as you might know, when you inject things, it causes a binding quicker to the opioid receptors in the brain, and so the faster that binding happens, the more euphoric the high, which is why people prefer to inject, because it hits pretty hard and pretty fast. One of the things that people describe, my friends who use fentanyl describe, is that it masks or covers or takes away pain, physical pain and emotional pain. There's a feeling of deep peace, and usually followed by deep sleep. Opioids slow down the entire central nervous system, and we have overdoses when things get too slow and people stop breathing, and that's what we have. So one of the big questions we ask is there a silver bullet? Is there something that's going to make fentanyl go away? And the short answer is no. Fentanyl is here to stay for a great number of reasons, but mostly for profit, for potency, and for street-level demand. If you know Andrea Wu from the Globe and Mail, she did a wonderful expose a couple of years ago on the life cycle of fentanyl procurement and production. So just to give you some economics really fast, $12,500 can buy you a kilo of pure fentanyl from China. That can be turned into about 500,000 pills at 2 micrograms per pill. Each one of those pills can be sold for about $20 to $80, depending on where and when you're selling it. That is amazing turnover. That is great money. It's not going away. And if you ask me for notes later, you can see these studies and look at them. The profits are staggering, and so the inherent greed of capitalism is ensured that fentanyl's place in our culture is pretty permanent. And no matter how many dealers we bust or how many labs we shut down, it is the most popular street drug at this time and will continue to be so. There is hope, though, and I want to shift gears here a little bit. So just hang with me. So I want to highlight this one aspect. This is one piece, and it cuts back to our story about Francis. In the late 1980s, because yes, I am that old, I was given a sticker from my skateboard, and it said, "Hugs, not drugs." And we probably snickered at it and whatnot, and it was a pithy statement, and it was quickly, kind of like, oh, that's silly and cute, and yeah, keep the kids off drugs. But in retrospect, I'm discovering that maybe that contained more wisdom than I realized. Now, it would be naive and reductionist to say that we can make fentanyl go away by hugging everybody, but I think it's inescapable that touch and connection play a critical role in well-being, and a lack of meaningful touch in our lives and in the lives of our neighbors contributes to aspects of the crisis that we're in. I believe that meaningful interpersonal touch needs to be part of the medical and theological response to this crisis, and I'll explain that a bit more. In my personal connections with fentanyl users, the comments I frequently hear are, "It's like the warmth of a mother's hug." Or, "When I take fentanyl, it feels like I'm safe and I'm loved." or one of my students recently told me, it's like, she said, when I take fentanyl, it's like for that moment I feel Jesus' love. And that breaks my heart. This is, of course, anecdotal, but the science seems to confirm this. A 2018 study showed that there was a relationship between non-sexual touch, hugs primarily, and the perceptions of well-being and general health following interpersonal conflict. So basically, in short, people felt much better about the situations that they're in, the conflicts that they were in, if they had received meaningful physical touch that day. So if you had a conflict and you had a hug that day or some type of connection that day, there would be a dramatic increase in your sense of well-being and your ability to face that conflict. And it didn't matter whether that hug or that connection was from a partner or even just from a stranger. It increased your body's ability and your brain's ability to deal with the conflict. That is amazing. Hugs, scientifically, literally buffer us against stressors. And they increase our sense of social support and our awareness of care, our awareness of empathy. Hugs and touch help reduce anxiety and help us to cope with challenges. I remember when my daughter was first born, there was a bit of a mix-up in the hospital. I had to go down with her to where they were weighing the babies, and she got stuck in this nursery area, and all the babies were hysterical down there. They were all under heat lamps. It was really tragic. But she was upset, and I put my hand on her little frog tummy, and I talked to her, and she calmed right down. I watched this physical connection between me and her, and I think that's when we bonded, and it was a really precious memory for me. But the idea of touch brought peace to her in an amazing way. Interpersonal touch, as we see in the story of St. Francis, is not just a one-way street, but rather studies show that touch creates a sense of psychological reciprocity. I love that word. And in giving and receiving. So there's like ebb and a flow, and a give and a take. There's a flow that goes back and forth between each other when we hug or we touch. This is really sad in some ways too, though, because it's been long noted that childhood trauma is a significant factor in the emergence of substance abuse and addictive behavior. So if a child has encountered trauma, they are way more likely to fall into addictive behavior later in life. And one of the most significant studies show that one of the most significant aspects of that is an absence of healthy early life touch. What this does in the brain, or what the scientists tell me, is that this creates a lifelong craving for dopamine, which is one of the things that leads people into addiction. People crave touch, and opioids fill that gap. I'll talk about the rise of the machines. For me personally, because of complex childhood trauma and violence, I have been resistant to or fearful of human touch. And I know how isolating that can be. This is a widely known challenge when we're dealing with marginalized or at-risk folk. We have to be very, very cautious and very aware, and consent is so essential. Douglas Copeland featured this in one of his novels, and it was just kind of a joke, a throwaway, but hug machines are actually becoming a reality. I think that's kind of cool. Understandably, the technology is still a little bit behind, and they're not working really well because they can't seem to interpret what users want. Hugging is like an intricate dance, right? And it's like, how long do you hold? When does it become awkward? When do you pat? When do you just, stand there? And as you know, there's many humans who haven't figured that out yet as well. And so the machines don't read cues very well, and so it's a little comical, and I don't know if I would want to hug a monitor. I don't know. It's whatever, but it's a cool idea, and eventually AI will probably evolve to the point where it can read us well, but until then, it's up to us. So let's move towards a theology of fentanyl. Where are we going with all this? To think theologically through these matters returns us to this question of what does it mean to love my neighbor? And the call to love one's neighbor is a central theme in the Torah, in the Jewish tradition, my own tradition. And much of the civil law pivots around this idea of taking care of one another, protecting each other from harm, protecting each other from extortion or injustice, and creating opportunities for dignified generosity, so that when you are generous with someone, you don't rob them of their dignity. You do it in tactful and meaningful ways. The scriptures provide a framework of hope for the marginalized within the Jewish tradition, and severe censure against those who fail to care for them. This is one of the most significant themes of the Hebrew prophets. Is basically, if I could sum it up really simply, is you're not taking care of the people who need you most. Get your act together. That's kind of how I sum up the Hebrew prophets. Further to this, the preservation of life has the highest precedence in Jewish law, pikuach nefesh, and self-sacrificing love of neighbor is found throughout the Torah. And it is codified in early Jewish thought. Love of neighbor is expanded upon significantly in the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, as you know, emphasizing the caring for the poor. And this, I think, can be applied to anyone in our society who is suffering from any kind of distress. Especially those who are deemed outsiders. And I believe this extends to those who suffer from mental illness and addiction, social alienation, and not just material poverty. In the apocalyptic parable which you read earlier about the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, Jesus calls his disciples to see that their orthopraxis, their right actions, their justice actions, regarding those in need, is a vicarious way of loving him. Those who fed the hungry, invited in the stranger, clothed the naked, visited the sick, and imprisoned are shocked by how they did not recognize Jesus as the one being in need. And then Jesus answers their shock with these beautiful words, I tell you the solemn truth, whenever you did these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me. So whenever loving care is given to the most vulnerable, it is done for him. The desire for orthopraxis is not limited to the teachings of Jesus. I hate to tell you this, but Christianity does not have the market cornered on justice and love. I study Islam a fair bit. Most of my neighbors and friends are Muslim, so I kind of swim in that world. In the hadith, the Prophet had said, the one who looks after a widow or a poor person is like a mujahid, a warrior who fights for Allah's cause, or like him who performs prayers all night and fasts all the day. And there are many other passages that are similar, and our friend who's coming from the Sikh community will have similar ideas too. So what am I proposing? What's the big push here? Some years ago, actually, I'll show you a little tin there, as a little thing. My daughter Tahila and I, we live in Whalley, so it's kind of, it's an interesting neighborhood. And Tahila was troubled, even like at 3 years old, she would say like, this is wrong, Abba, we need to do something. And she saw the loneliness, this is the thing that bothered her the most, the loneliness in our neighborhood. And she developed and prepared these cute little care packages with coffee cards and socks, and then she wrote love notes. She says, people need to know that a little girl named Tahila loves them, and an Abba who's 40. And so there's a little picture there. And so we went out and gave these things to people and connected them and talked to them. And everyone that we met wanted to do something in return. They wanted to be a mutual connection. And some drew art for us, or some found something cool amongst their gear to give to Tahila. And almost everyone we met asked for a hug. Okay? I think there was only one fellow who didn't. And Tahila, of course, she was frightened and said, no. And so I was the surrogate hug. And I say, to this day, those hugs and those little trips out into the neighborhood are among my most precious things that I hold in my heart. I will never forget those hugs. And I think that opportunity, that experience with her, began to change my own brain and my own mind about connecting with at-risk folk. Because I used to think that, well, you provide the material needs. Blast it all. We need housing. Blast it all. We need safe injection sites. We need warm socks. We need clean clothes. We need clean supply. But my posture began to shift in that I also needed to provide a posture of embrace, of connection, of friendship, of mutuality. This has had interesting results. About 2 months ago, I was out walking in my neighborhood. I encountered a chap who was clearly high. He was out directing traffic and was in imminent danger of being hit. We go back to the sidewalk. He's okay, and he's standing really close to me, and he's like, "Hey, you got a light?" Of course, I always have a light, just in case. And he's like looking at the fire, and he's, "Can I keep it?" And it's like, "Yeah, totally." And then he stands a little closer. He says, "I'm mirroring you." I'm like, I can see that. He says, and then he gets his eyes go childlike, and he goes, "Can I have a hug?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." And he put his head on my chest, and he sat there for about a minute. I just held him. And something happened to me as well. And I'd gone out for a walk because I was pretty blue. Depression had been swirling like dark clouds over me. And there I'm in the street, and this guy's holding me, and I'm holding him. And my heart was healed in that moment in a small way. And there was chemically, there was dopamine that shot through my little body, and it was like, yeah, I needed that. And I think that dude knew that I needed that. Mutuality. This brings us back to St. Francis, and don't worry, we're just about done. And I find that true compassion, true justice, has mutuality at its center. In my work with at-risk individuals, there's something priceless in the exchange of an embrace. And I believe that the wounded and damaged parts of our own souls, and we all have that, can find healing and comfort in these experiences. So with this awareness of the tragically unmet needs for human connection and the economics of fentanyl, I'm proposing an orthopraxis theology, a theology with legs on, that centers itself in addressing the physical needs, warm blankets, hot meals, safe places to sleep. These are all critical. But it also has a posture of embrace, a posture of mutuality. We don't condescend to help other people. We embrace them as mutuals, as friends. And sometimes we do that literally, and sometimes we do that figuratively. But I believe that people sense our posture and they mirror us. Furthermore, I'm a proponent for legalization and safe supply, and I think this will do a world of good. It will reduce overdoses. It will minimize the criminal greed element and the exhausting and dehumanizing aspect of hustle that is required to even just sustain one of these habits. And most of hustle is dangerous and harmful. And most critically, I'm proposing a theology of fentanyl in which we see ourselves, like Francis, as a conduit and a recipient of the open-armed love of God. So when our neighbors are with us, they know that they're safe, they know that they're known, they know that they're loved, they have a safe and a clean place to sleep, they have safe and clean supply, and they have a lingering embrace. So may we find hope in our relationships with each other, with our communities of faith, and with our world at large. May we find ourselves in a spirit of compassion and mutuality, and perhaps learning to hug again would be healing for us all. Thank you.
Though I may speak with bravest fire and have the
removing masks is another way for us to get connected to each other. Thank you so much for your words to us this morning. As we come together in this time of prayer, I encourage you to find your center and let your body find a comfortable position. Let your thoughts collect and calm together. Gracious presence, in whom we live and move and have our being. Help us in this time to feel your presence, which is always with us. Help us to trust that the words that we have to offer our gratitudes and our concerns are adequate. And help us to trust that even if we have no words, but can only offer groans or silence or smiles, that your Spirit lifts these to you in all of their fullness. Help us to trust that it is not you who need to hear our words, for you already know everything that is in our heart. Help us to trust that it is your Spirit moving within us, which helps us to find the words we need, the actions we need, the communications we need to be alive. Help us to trust that as we pray, we are not alone, and that it is not up to us alone to be the only one who is offering the prayers that are needed this day. Help us to feel the presence of others in this room and across this land who are also praying, lifting up gratitudes, lifting up concerns. Help us to feel our presence as part of a whole, so much larger than each of us together. Help us to trust that even before we began to pray, you were already fully present, seeking to make real the responses that are needed to all the prayers we have lifted up. And grant us this day whatever we need to be worthy of the prayers we have offered. Grant us this day whatever we need to be able to live the lives that are the responses to our prayers. Gracious One, we are so grateful to you that we are not alone, that we are not needing to make this up out of nothing, but rather that we come before you as inheritors of a long tradition over many centuries. We recall how many times and in how many places people have gathered together and shared with one voice the words that Jesus taught his followers to say. And so here today, hear us as we offer this paraphrasing of the prayer of Jesus. Let us pray together. Holy One, Holy Three, in whom we are one, fill our world with your wonder. May the loving, right relationships that you eternally are become actualized right here, right now. May all living beings receive from their labor all that is needed for the well-being of all. Forgive us the harm our culture does as we receive healing from those wounded by our stories, our laws, and our commerce. Save us from trials that overwhelm, and let us not be tricked into believing lies that are evil. For the kinship of all living things, the power and the glory abide in you, now and forever. May it be so.
Friends, let us go forth in love, in openness to one another, in mutuality, with compassion, with grace, not seeing how we can save others, but seeing how we can all work together for the benefit of all. Let us go now in this love and graciousness. Amen.